When I Am Empty, Please Dispose of Me Properly explores the American dream that governs and shapes our personal narratives. The exhibition focuses on two key factors of the American dream, consumption and disposability. And much of the work is lens-based and either photography or film, and draws from pop art and advertising aesthetics to examine consumption and disposability through both its allure and contradiction. The title of the exhibition comes from the prompt from the manufacturer on a what-a-cup beverage container, enlarged to bodily proportions. The empty cup and phrase take on new meaning, drawing attention to the spent, drained state of Americans, both physically and mentally. I'm here with Ayanna Dozier and Pacifico Silano. I'm going to ask you to describe your work in the exhibition.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Jenny. A general visual description of my work is a film entitled Forever Your Girl, where we see a Black femme who tries to re-experience a kind of childhood innocence by riding a kiddie ride or a kiddie carousel ride. It is an installation that is then projected onto a mirror so that the image bounces back onto handmade screen latex in order to provide multiple viewing angles and viewing opportunities where the image itself then becomes splintered and audiences can not only see it 4 times, be it the mirror projection, the image projected back into the mirror and the screen itself, but then also can see themselves inside the film as such.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me here. So the work that I'm making in the exhibition is all sourced from vintage gay erotica. It looks a lot at the sort of desire of power that gay men often will sort of eroticize. Materials that I use in my practice are all from, vintage gay erotica, from, the post-Stonewall riots, 1970s, all the way up until now, the 90s, is where I'm at currently. I've been working with these archives of mine for the last 12 years, which is kind of crazy to think about. I kind of think about them as Trojan horses. I think about these pieces of being really seductive, but also sort of more complicated the longer you sit with them. And that's really sort of at the heart of what I'm working with.
For me, one of the aspects that is interesting is thinking about the archival material that you're either creating or using within your pieces, and thinking about that in relation to the content of the softcore porn that you're engaging with. Ayanna, your work is done on Super 8mm film. Pacifico, you're working with magazines from back issues of Honcho and Mandate from the 70s to the 90s. And I'm interested in hearing from you about why these materials were important to use within your work.
I think the use of the materials in my practice, specifically with Super 8mm film or analog-based practices and mediums, you see more prominently than 16mm or other types of film. The grain, because it's much smaller, so you can't really project it that large. But it's also more tactile in that because it's a smaller camera, you get to shoot these more intimate scenarios, or you get to shoot more quickly if you are shooting on the streets, which is, if we want to connect it then to the history of pornography, why Super 8 was the go-to film medium for shooting pornographic films, because it was cheaper, quicker, and more discreet. So if you wanted to do something more illicit in public, you can kind of shoot it out and then run away if someone saw you. For a film like Forever Your Girl, the use of softcore porn as a overarching aesthetic guideline, if not a mood board, I would say, was a way to think about how can my work trouble visual pleasure. If the content of the film itself is quite sad, this might actually be the only way I can get audiences to sit with me, that can I actually ask someone to sit with me and have a conversation around losing childhood innocence? Not entirely sure, but I know I can get people to look at my body a certain way, or at least obsess over that wig that cost me several $100s, right? The nails that cost me several $100s, the outfit, the tight crop shot of my butt, the stripper heels, and at least become obsessed over those details. And then through that act of seduction, get them maybe to take in information they are unlikely to take in otherwise.
It's interesting in relation to Pacifico's Trojan horse, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm always sort of thinking about that idea, right, of like seduction and repulsion and how those contradictory things are so really intertwined with one another. I started making my work in relationship to my uncle who had HIV and passed away and was erased from my family. And I was thinking, like, what were the images that he grew up with or he came of his own sexuality? And these were those images that I landed on. My parents also ran a porn store while I was growing up, so I think that's also a big part of my biography and really does factor into why I use the material that I use. It's very familiar to me. I'm very comfortable with it. I actually don't see it as this like really like sexualized material. I see it almost as commerce, and it's like I was looking at it through the HIV/AIDS lens of loss and longing for so long, and now I'm looking at it through the lens of American identity and masculinity, and these sort of markers of just, the cowboy, the biker, the police officer, these roles of authority in the way that particularly white gay men sort of fetishize these positions. I print them out, some of them as dye sublimation prints, which is a process that infuses pigmentation into aluminum. So then they're on these really hard substrates and they're very sort of slick, but also with the centerfolds that are in the exhibition that have been meticulously folded just right to reference the original source material of a centerfold. You can actually cut yourself on them. I have. There's this sort of physical interaction that happens with them. And so, yeah, material is so crucial to the work that I make.
We had a lot of conversations about whether we wanted it on a pedestal or like attached in the way that it is right now.
Yeah, it was that idea of like, we really want to replicate intimate experience somebody might have with a centerfold, but at the same time, what you see in the images is kind of denying you of the original intention. There's never any nudity in my work. People are like, wait, this is from pornography? Where's the goods? And so it's really about the crop, it's about the gesture, and it really, just the way somebody holds their hands can become like incredibly powerful and unnerving. And it's that gesture that you don't think to look at because you're looking at something else on the page or in the film,
But I'm also very interested in kind of thinking through like how you use film projectors, which is what it was supposed to be, how important that aspect of work is for like your practice.
The use of film projectors and or playing with projectors has a critical role, in my work. And part of that is to remind audiences of what very well could be a dead medium in 20, 30 years. I hope not, but the harsh realities of film is that it does require a lot of natural resources. It is a depleting resource. And if Kodak goes under, it's done. And I'm really partial to that, not in a way that I'm nostalgic for it, perhaps, but I'm more obsessed with the sheer magic of cinema. And that's such a cliche, but it's that early moment at the end of the 19th century of recognizing how you can manipulate light and to project something and have it almost capture someone's imagination, if not infect their imagination, was closely also related to magic. In fact, the early projectionists were called magicians. And all of the things they would do in cranking up the projector and moving the projector around, and that relationship to magic influence laws against going to the theater. In Ohio, for example, there was a law that I believe was overturned in 1917 that was against going to the theater. Because it was a conservative, environment, and the judge was like, "This is devil worship." As someone who is not only kin to witchcraft and who has no problem being associated with, all things devil worshiping, right? I think that return for me is so important because most times digital projectors aren't always able to capture that magic in the way that a film projector can. But I would say that anxiety is what drives me to come back to a moment of not simplicity, but a moment of technical skill set that, again, inspired a generation to just become possessed by the image.
I'm really moved too by this desire to interpret through like mirrors, right? Like overt mirrors versus like hidden mirrors. I also like this idea of kind of witchcraft and alchemy that is like a part of your process, which feels like maybe I didn't quite understand it until like the mirror process happened, where I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's all there for us to see.
General manipulation of just light and imagery. Part of the installation on an educational level is the old school mirror trick that projectionists used when they didn't have a zoom lens to make the image bigger, because those can be very expensive on a 16 millimeter projector, you know? So they would just take a mirror and flip the image, right? And it magnifies it on scale. The average is about 10 times bigger, and then put up a screen and have audiences watch it from the other side. So on the nerdy side, that's also the inspiration of it, of just like the wonders you can do with these basic forms. And then there's the narcissism of people like looking at themselves in the mirror. And I saw that there was a lot of selfies being taken. The content of the film to me is still very sad, despite the seduction of it. But we spoke about this when we had another preparation for the show, that I get to trap people or entrap them in my own madness, right? But I'm like, you're literally in the body of the film by doing that.
How do you feel about entrapping people in your madness?
Sometimes it's the best part is when they don't know. It's like when the viewer is just so seduced by what you've put on the wall or what you've installed, and they don't realize that they're partaking in, something that's a little bit more critical than they realize. And some people have that aha moment where they're like, oh wait, this is way darker than I thought it was. It's not this like sexy barrel-chested man with like ammunition on his chest. It's like this image of like pretty overtly, violent. And it's being sexualized. And what does that mean to find that attractive?
It's a good segue to the next question, which is about kind of the titling and ideas around control.
Titles are so important.
Titles are so important.
Titling is so important in the work, and especially with appropriation, you're sort of using it as almost as a roadmap for the viewer, for them to sort of get in some sort of insight into what I'm thinking when I'm making the work in the studio. I also like song titles. I like lyrics. I love a long title. This was short and sweet. I was thinking a lot about control, actually, and just the sort of dynamics that happen in gay relationships. There's always a submissive person and a more dominant person. And what does that look like? The sort of way that you negotiate power between two men when you're being intimate. Possession, to me, it's like, it came to me when I was looking at the centerpiece of the triptych, which is actually, it's a backside of a more submissive man that's being gripped by a more dominant man. Some people think it's actually like somebody like doing a bear hug, but it's actually interesting when people realize what is actually going on in the image, what is happening. It sort of takes on a more darker, more complicated feeling that is elicited out of the viewer, which I think has been really fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Love what Pacifico just stated with regards to titles. Is it's the roadmap to the work. It's the insight into the brain of the artist, of what they're kind of mapping out when they're making the work itself. And I think that's so true of my practice. Not all of my titles are song titles or a lyric from a song, but I would say all of my titles for my artwork are lyrical. So with Forever Your Girl, I grew up listening to Paula Abdul, but specifically just that album. All of her videos, not just for Straight Up, but also Cold Hearted, and Forever Your Girl, there's a precise choreography there, while she's also trying to demand that her femininity be accepted in this way. But it's contrasted with this very hard visual of a woman doing really incredible things with her body. Something like Forever Your Girl, she's not actually trying to be anyone's sub, that she's kind of demanding, I can be yours, but there's terms and conditions that we're gonna have to accept.
Thank you both for being here. The exhibition is up through the end of April, and I look forward to more dialogue within the space with both of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you. This was lovely.